Ruth has a degree in zoology from Manchester University and has been a fellow of the Zoological Society, London, for over 50 years now, and discovered in the 1980s that they had an educational volunteers program that she then joined. She has now spent 22 very happy years, she says, mostly on a Tuesday, talking to their visitors about all the animals, and only left when the remit was changed to policing the visitors if they did something wrong. So, Ruth, over to you. If it's Tuesday, it's Zoo Day.
Thank you very much. Now, the Zoological Society of London, that is ZSL, and London Zoo were the brainchild of Sir Stamford Raffles in the early 19th century, and London Zoo was opened to the scientific public in 1828. It was intended as a collection of scientific interest and study. Over the years, many changes have taken place, with animal husbandry and management changing as ideas about the welfare, breeding, and conservation of the collection improved with increasing knowledge. Today, London Zoo is the oldest public zoo in the world, and together with its sister zoo Whipsnade, which was opened in 1931, is a formidable scientific organisation involved in not just animal welfare, but in the breeding of endangered species throughout the world in the hope that they can be returned to the wild. In 1967, as a zoology graduate, I was proposed and seconded to become a scientific fellow of the Zoological Society and started my close association with the zoo. At that time, and with subsequently 3 small children, my main aim was to make sure that they knew all their animals. But as time went by, they became so familiar with the place that they could all become tour guides. We also enjoyed Sunday lunches in the Fellows restaurant, which could only be used by Fellows and their guests. In 1984, while browsing through the Members of magazine, I discovered that the zoo actually had educational volunteers, which I applied to join, was interviewed, accepted, and thrown literally into the job of looking after the aquarium trolley. Now, the trolleys were basically cupboards on wheels with a tabletop on which we could put exhibits and the metal arch at the back to hang things over. And they were the brainchild of the then head of education, a man called Michael Borer. The idea was to have a trolley at strategic places in the zoo, such as the aquarium, reptiles, birds, cats, insects, primates, and everything else, on which artifacts relating to that specific area could be put on the top of the trolleys, and we could talk to visitors about them. Visitors could handle the material. Having visited many zoos around the world over many years, I think his idea was the very best, but sadly it's become very reduced at London Zoo, and even the fixed exhibits like the reptiles seem infrequently manned, or should I say person? Soon after I started, I found that my A-level teacher was also a volunteer. She was in charge of the insect trolley, and it took me about 18 months to call her Isabel instead of Mrs. Cruikshank. It was because of her that I studied zoology for my degree, and I would often join her on her trolley to learn more about the insect world. She was inspirational. Now, this aquarium trolley, which I acquired from somebody else, was an absolute mess and had very little on it. So I had to beg, borrow, and get exhibits wherever I could from. I also asked anyone, excuse me, going abroad to bring things home before we were actually prevented by doing so. There are laws now in effect that we can't bring anything into the country, animal or plant, because it may actually have bacteria or bugs or anything that could be dangerous to our environment. I also browsed beaches wherever we went and ended up with a display second to none. In fact, it was so good that I even had things pinched from it. I also had a job to teach other volunteers actually how to run that trolley, the same as all the volunteers were taught about all the trolleys in the zoo. And I spent 22 very happy years working there until they changed our remit to become more like police, telling visitors not to take photos of the gorillas with flash, not to bang on the glass, and other sins. I actually had to stop a stupid female gesturing to our silverback gorilla, the large male. She put her hands under her armpits and started saying, "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo." And I was telling her what an idiot she was and how cruel. And our silverback gorilla flew into a rage and threw himself literally at the glass at her. Now, thankfully, the glass in that section vibrated frighteningly, but it is specifically thick to prevent any damage to either party. And I think the other people who were standing around also got the message. Over the years, not only did I learn a lot, but I also hope that I gave our visitors an interesting experience, rather than just looking at the animals. Now, the title was If It's Tuesday, It's Zoo Day, because that was the day I eventually ended up doing my duties at London Zoo. Now, I have said we often receive material from all sorts of visitors, such as a small crocodile head. That was soon pinched off my trolley. Now, I have here some wonderful shells, such as this and
Wait a minute, here we come.
excuse me,
slideshow.
we're just getting the slideshow in action. Yes.
Yes, no, excuse me, my appearing. Oh. Never mind, let's have a look at that one.
Here we are. This beautiful helmet shell, this was brought to me from somebody who went to South Africa. And you can see how large it is.
Oh.
Can we have the next slide, please?
Yeah, that's the underside of it.
Oh, this is the underside of the shell. The next one is a golden cowrie. Now, this particular shell, if it was perfect, could cost serious money. And there's the underside, which my girls always called zip shells. Now, we actually have these in this country, but certainly not this type of size at all. They're about a centimetre long, the cowries in this country. Now, this very unusual fish is from the Amazon, and it was brought to me by my cotton when they went on a trip there. And by moving its fins, if you can see clearly the fins there, on the edge are almost comb-like. And they would drag the fins down those scales along the side of the body and actually communicate with other fish, other catfish, that is. Now, this particular shell is the turban shell. And if you see there's a round object, right, with a sort of a curl in it. Now, I've seen women wearing earrings and necklaces and bracelets made from these. They are actually the doors to the shell. And the animal often gets washed up on the beach. And in order not to dry out, it drags the door or a perculum in to seal itself off. Now, although I had studied paleontology, that is, fossils, I had usually fallen asleep in the lectures because they were so boring. But one day, the lecturer dropped a large freckled stone on the bench, and everyone who was asleep woke up instantly, and he said to us, "Do you know what this is?" Did we know what it was? He said, "It is a dinosaur turd, a dinosaur dropping." Now, the proper term for this type of material, fecal material, if you like, is that is fossilized, is a coprolite. And the zoo put on an interesting display one year called "Poo in the Zoo." I wonder if anybody went there and saw that. This was an exhibition of all sorts of coprolites, which caused some disgust amongst the visitors, but was of great interest to many others. I was invited by the curator of bugs, who I knew very well, to set up a display of fossils. Now that proved quite a learning curve to me because I really didn't learn anything at college. But I actually enjoyed doing this and talking to the visitors about it. And you can see this in the corner of bugs. No?
Well, let's try that one. See if it works. Here we go.
I think we're going to get there in a moment. That's one of my fossils. This is called a trilobite. And if you can see, there are 1, 2, 3 lobes in its abdomen, hence its name. And the next slide is, you can see on the left-hand side, a beautiful slice of something called a nautiloid. Now, each of these tiny compartments you can see goes from very small, gradually getting larger and larger and larger, and the animal lives at the largest one at the front here. Now, on the right here, this is a nautiloid or nautilus, a modern nautilus, and that's a shell that can be found on the beaches in the Far East. And it's a little bit, you can see here in the picture, there's the animal with its tentacles and its eye, and it lives in this outermost shell, cavity on the outside here. One day, I was put on a private trolley, and that is monkeys and apes. There are 4 different sorts of apes: chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutan, and something one of the scientists the previous years called the naked ape. Us. We are apes, whether you like it or not, in zoological terms. We have this trolley, some real, some reproduction, and hanging on the back frame was the skin of a black fringed colobus monkey that had actually died of measles at the zoo many years ago. The skull of a baby chimp is very like a human baby. Both have flattened faces and large eyes. The human face remains flat into adulthood, but within 3 years of the chimp, it extends and enlarges forward, where the olfactory or sense of smell becomes very enlarged. Chimps rely on their sense of smell much more than we do. I was explaining all of this to a very charming American gentleman, and having given him my spiel, I asked him where he was from and then what he did. I was somewhat embarrassed when he replied that he was Professor of Comparative Anatomy. He was actually very complimentary about the presentation, as he had never seen anything like it at all outside of the general public. This was the sort of thing you got in universities. Our big cat's trolley had both skulls and skin on it. Skins, the latter being thrown over the arch. The idea here was to exhibit how strong the cat's jaws were. Look at the very large canine teeth, which they used for suffocating their prey. If you ever seen any of David Attenborough's films, you will have seen big cats suffocating. They go to the throat of the deer that they're catching. The skins, leopard and ocelot, were ready for use in the fur trade and had been donated by customs and excise who had originally confiscated them. The strangest situation here was the number of gentlemen of Middle Eastern origin who were asking us, how much is that skin? And we had to explain that they were not for sale because we were trying to encourage visitors to learn about endangered species and why they should not be killed for the fur trade. Now, London Zoo now, together with most zoos around the world, belongs to an organisation called CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. This organisation tries to help endangered species anywhere in the world through education, breeding, and returning where possible to the wild. There is something called a red book, and it's not Mayo's. This book is very special because it actually records the genetic ancestry of each animal in captivity to enable satisfactory matings and to ensure successful gene pools, simply as a father didn't breed with a daughter and a mother with a son, so that there could be no problems. There are many centres now taking rescued animals like baby orangutans, ring-tailed monkeys, vervet monkeys, lion-headed tamarins, where the mother has been killed and the baby sold as a pet. These poor little animals are taken into organisations which look after them. They're reared there and taught as many skills as their adults would have, and then they release them into safe environments. We have had several success stories where with the cooperation of other zoos over endangered species. So that, for example, we have bred in captivity from something called a world herd of only 9 animals. That way we could ensure that they weren't interbreeding. Such an animal was the Arabian Oryx. Now, this animal in about 1950s and 60s was almost extinct in the wild, usually in places like Syria, even Israel. And unfortunately, this animal, the Arabian Oryx, we were able to breed them here in England with international cooperation, and they were returned to the wild, to the protection of the Bedouin Arabs, who in return for this protection could use the males, the excess males, for meat and skins. Another species were the Przewalski horses from Mongolia, which were all successful in this way. Now, sadly, in the last few months, I've collected newspaper cuttings that show how much damage we are doing in our world. There is a very small animal. It's a mammal like us, but unusually it actually has scales on its body. No, that's not it. Thank you. No,
Too early.
Too early. Excuse me, he's too early. And these animals are hunted, and eventually it won't take long before they will be almost extinct. Thankfully, particularly England, we have banned trophy hunting, so people can't go out, get their trophies and bring them back to this country. were losing large parts of the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. And there, I can tell you one specific story about the golden lion tamarind. They cut a swathe of trees through the forest so that they divided a community of animals that then couldn't get to reach to the other side. And there was a lot of interbreeding. And so what the scientists did was they built a bridge, if you like, of trees, a swathe of trees that wouldn't be cut down so that the little tiny monkeys could go back and forth again. Now, we can do the horseshoe crab now, please, sir. That's it. This is a very peculiar looking creature. Some of you may know it, some of you won't. It's called a horseshoe crab. It's not a very interesting looking beast, but it does have something very special about it. This is the underside. Our blood is called hemoglobin, and its basic component is iron, and our blood is red. This creature, which is a crustacean, has blood where the component is calcium, not calcium, sorry, copper, and its blood is a palish greeny blue. And somewhere in America a few years ago, they discovered that medical equipment sometimes came out of the sterilizer and was not completely cleaned, and that this particular animal's blood could actually show it up very quickly and easily so that it could then be re-sterilized. Except these poor beasts now are literally milked of their blood in vast quantities in order to satisfy our need. I'm told that when they've finished milking them, so to speak, they are put back in the ocean, but they think that only 30% survive. If they carry on doing what they're doing at the moment, we won't have this species here anymore. I gave a talk on U3A, Belsize Park, not long ago, and it was to one of my groups that I was giving a lecture. And the talk was the world's most destructive animal, Homo, not sapiens, Homo horribilis. At Christmas time, the zoo puts on a nativity scene, and we have two Father Christmases, because we have the numbers of schools actually going through the zoo at that time was vast, and volunteers either stood outside and talked to the children about the animals, about the reindeer. Well, that wasn't in the nativity, but donkeys certainly were, lambs certainly were, and also camels. Our role, as I said, was to talk to the children, and then we would send one at a time in to see Father Christmas, where there would be either a volunteer or a teacher. And Father Christmas would say to the children, what would you like for Christmas? And inevitably we'd get whatever was on the market that particular year. And the boys all wanted one thing and the girls all wanted something else. And it was actually a lovely experience, I must tell you. I really enjoyed it. One black child, a little girl of about 9 years old. Oh, I forgot, excuse me. And Father Christmas would then reach into his sack and give each child a gift. And one little girl, with a black child, looked at Father Christmas when he'd given her her present, and she said, I don't want that rubbish. And both Father Christmas and I were quite shocked. Anyhow, he reached in again to try and give her something else. No, I don't want that. So I went outside, I got the teacher, I explained the situation, and the teacher came in and took the little girl away. Otherwise, these activities went off like clockwork. As I said earlier, I really thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed also the reptile trolley, which is a fixed exhibit. Now, when you go into the reptile house, as you go in, on the left-hand side is a large horseshoe-shaped display place. And there we had a crocodile skin and some lizard skins, which had been confiscated, again, by customs and excise. We also had what looked like a huge lump of stone. Don't be fooled. It's a fossil vertebra, which was really heavy and large, and it was from an unnamed dinosaur, a vertebra from the spine. Explaining it to visitors as to why it felt like a lump of stone and was so heavy is because of what fossilization is all about. Bone or other tissue turned into stone. The word fossil comes from fossilis, the Latin, meaning to dig up. I was able to go behind the scenes there to see their breeding program as well, and saw many different threatened species, including endangered terrapins. We've got all sorts of little tanks up there where they're actually breeding all sorts of endangered reptiles. Some of you may not like what I'm going to say now. I also had a well-fed adult boa constrictor draped round my shoulders. It was very heavy, but cool and silky to touch. A lot of people think snakes are sort of, I don't know, sticky or something, but snakes aren't, reptiles aren't. Now, to tell if something is real when it's snake skin, if you rub your hand up and down the material, if it's smooth, it's a fake. If it's real, it seems rough one way. Now, another of the largest reptiles that we have in the zoo, in fact, it's the largest lizard in the world, is a Komodo dragon that come from the Komodo Islands in Indonesia. One we have is a male and the other a female, and they're usually kept apart. But the female actually laid eggs from a previous mating, and these had to be rescued and incubated separately, because if the young had hatched, they would have been eaten immediately. In the wild, they take to the trees as soon as they've hatched and stay there until they're big enough and strong enough to get down onto the earth. Now, the Komodos have about 54 lethal bacteria in their mouths, and to kill their prey, they bite it, usually they're large animals, bite them on the leg and then follow them until they die, because of course the bacteria kill the animal eventually. That's a nice way to go. Now, the bird trolley was a no-no for me because I hate dead birds. But the one in the elephant house was very exciting, as we had an elephant skull and a rhino horn on it. Can I have the next slide, please, number 13? If you can see there, that's a picture of an elephant tooth. Now, you can see from my hand how big it is. And, excuse me, here is the roughened surface to which the elephants grind their food, and this is the root here. Elephants have 6 sets of teeth to last their lives. Once they lose the last set, they can no longer feed and subsequently die. The teeth are exactly the same as fossilized mammoth teeth. Contrary to many expectations, the rhino horn is made up of strands of keratin that our nails and hair are made of. They are not actually hair, but they are clumped together with material from glands in the elephant's nose. Unfortunately, there is a belief in several Far Eastern countries that it contains aphrodisiac qualities and is highly prized and priced. Needless to say, that disappeared one day, a bit like my crocodile head. Now, one of the events I used to love were the open evenings, particularly in the aquarium. I would go with one of the keepers, Steve, to Sainsbury's, which is down in Camden, and get in all the food and drink and lay it out appetizingly on plates. My main job of the evening was to sell raffle tickets, as well as talking about the history of the building and its inhabitants. One thing it appeared was I had a talent for selling raffle tickets and used to make quite a lot of money. Now, in 1992, there was an uproar amongst many of the staff and many members of the society. There was a feeling that the Zoological Society may be trying to sell the zoo for building land, because it's 30+ acres, in fact, that the zoo has there. Now, this was strongly denied by ZSL, but when they asked to see the books for my husband to look through, it was denied. Every year, these figures were all shown at the AGM, but this particular year, they were not available. I joined a group of keepers and other staff and fellows who had voting rights to find out what was happening. We managed to get a quorum and organize an extraordinary general meeting in AEN place at the house near University College. In a packed hall of over 500 people, that was fellows of the society and other people, or staff, etc. With the press excluded, we managed to throw out the existing president, secretary, and treasurer, who we felt were responsible for what was going on. And we elected a new president, secretary, and treasurer, and made sure our treasured zoo would continue. It has gone from strength to strength over the intervening years, with bigger, better enclosures for its animals, better husbandry, and more species that everybody can see. But we did have financial problems, and excuse me, we did have financial problems, and we lost 5 of our 8 zoo staff as a consequence. Sorry, aquarium staff as a consequence. And I volunteered to come in 1 day a week during the period to help out, and ended up brushing the public areas with wet sand and feeding the fish. Some liked pellets, others preferred flakes, and then there were the fussy ones. The axolotl is what is known as a neotenic form of the salamander. It looks a little bit like a frog tadpole. You can see that the gills on the side there. It's not one of my favorite looking animals, I must tell you. But this neotenic form, the tadpole form, can actually breed the same as the adult salamander because they're amphibians. This one will only eat slivers of fresh beef heart if dangled in front of its nose. The pike, on the other hand, will only eat live fish. And I had to catch one in a net from another tank next to the pike and pop it into the pike's tank. I always felt bad about that, and I used to apologize to my victim. In 2006, a huge consignment of illegal corals and tropical fish from Indonesia was intercepted by the police at Heathrow and brought to London Zoo in a room that I think was about 40 foot long by 20 foot long by 15 foot long, behind the scenes in the aquarium this is, were thousands of newspaper wrapped amorphous parcels tied with plastic string. I unwrapped several and was shocked at the damage done. Excuse me. He's not very good at this, is he, folks? I thought I had him trained. So each part contained a piece of all shapes and colours. I unwrapped several and was shocked at the damage done to a reef of living creatures, possibly detonated by explosives. Now stop, please, because if I can just show you here, you can see on the red coral here, which is called organ pipe coral, lots and lots of little holes. And here on the blue coral, lots and lots of tiny holes, much, much smaller. And here on this branched coral, lots and lots of tiny holes. Now, Pollock, these tiny little holes are occupied by something called a coral polyp. And if you remember when you were children, or even as adults taking your grandchildren around on the beach or whatever, you would have found a reddish coloured jelly-like creature that we call a sea anemone. And the sea anemone is exactly the same as this little animal here, but much larger. And usually they have these tentacles at the top, a mouth here in the middle, and also an exit, but you can't see that, for waste. Now, they live in this tiny little hole, which they've actually made themselves from calcium or argonite or whatever. And together, these millions and millions of tiny little creatures create this huge coral. And when they die, the new polyp will take over and continue the building. Now, I'm actually going to show you. Can you talk me back?
Yes.
If you can see this beautiful, this is real blue coral, but it's also called fire coral. And if I bring it closer to you, you might be able to see the tiny toes. And the reason it's called fire coral is if you get stung by it, it is a burning, horrible sensation, and it can last from 2 days to 2 weeks. This one is the branched coral. See all the holes in the branching? And all this material has been made by tiny, tiny little animals that we call coral polyps. Now, one of the things that we do not do in the zoo is, although we breed coral polyps and real life coral, we never ever put dead coral into any of our tanks to decorate our aquaria. And what we do with the vast majority of this stuff, I don't know where it is now, I haven't been behind the scenes for a while, is we crush the coral and make coral sand for the base of our tanks. Now, I have here a picture. I don't know if you can see it clearly. It's actually a picture of our daughter and granddaughter. And our granddaughter is looking out through a shark's jaw. That disappeared from the zoo as well. Again, some of you will know all about Nemo. Now, Nemo is in fact a variety or species of clownfish. And it is peculiar in the fact that it can actually grow and live and swim and amongst the tentacles of sea anemones. Sea anemones being highly enlarged forms of those tiny little polyps. In fact, some of them have even tentacles that can be 10 or 12 centimeters long. Other fish, if they were to swim in those tentacles, would be caught and eaten. And it is believed that the slime on its body contains a chemical that the anemone does not respond to. Sadly, we went to the New Jerusalem Aquarium a couple of years ago, and they have this huge circular tank. It must be about 8 meters in diameter, and about 3 meters high, with dozens and dozens and dozens of clownfish swimming in it. And there isn't a sea anemone in sight. And I actually spoke to the curator of the aquarium and suggested to him that really they weren't presenting their clownfish in the best possible way. I feel I can do it because being a fellow of the Zoological Society, we do have some kudos in this. Now, another exciting experience I had, believe it or not, was watching, ladies listen to this, a male seahorse giving birth to live young. The female actually lays her eggs inside a pouch of the male, where they are fertilized. And on that pouch, it looks almost like an umbilical hole in the front. And as the male seahorse is giving birth, that little hole opens and the fish looks like it's gone into labor. And then little spurts of black commas are ejected and float up to the top of the tank, where there is plankton for them to eat. And we've been very successful in breeding seahorses, I'm glad to say. Another time, we had what looked like black grapes, which were cuttlefish eggs, about 1 centimeter in diameter. And when they hatched, I wanted to watch the young, and on one occasion I was sitting there drawing the movements of their tiny tentacles, because they have specific movements that have a meaning. The next thing I realized, that all of them had arranged themselves into a semicircle and were watching me. Now, these animals belong to a group of mollusks, stroke snails, called cephalopods. The largest fly in the world belongs to the colossal squid from this group, and is the size of a football or even a dinner plate. I feel that these eyes are so enormous because these creatures go down very much down into the deep where it's black. But there are animals which have what's known as light, called bioluminescence, and maybe they get some of their prey in this way. They also catch their prey. They're big enough to actually ensnare whales, small whales. Now, my final story is not what I experienced, as it took place during the 1930s. They had night watchmen going around all the areas of the zoo. And in fact, quite recently, we did have a break-in at the aquarium, where one of the tanks, the huge tanks on the right-hand side as you go in, was smashed. and the fish were left in about 12 inches of water and were very, very stressed when they were found. But what happened in the 1930s was very bizarre. The watchmen went into the aquarium, shining their light, it was very, very dark in there, and they see a pair of eyes walking towards them. About 12 inches off the ground. They fled, and they got more of the night watchmen to come. And they came into the aquarium, and they walked through, and there it was, still walking towards them. But this time, backed up with all the others, they felt safe enough to see what it was. It was an octopus that had escaped from its tank and was having a walkabout. So they took their octopus, put it back in its tank, and made sure that the lid was secure. Right. I think if anyone, hang on a minute. Yes, it's time, I think, where I stopped, to let people ask me questions if they wish to.
Ruth, thank you so much for a very different perspective of London Zoo. I do like that last story about the octopus walking about. I don't know what I'd do if I was confronted by an octopus, but I suppose the story or the story you told us about the possible sale that people were thinking about at London Zoo was unthinkable, really, when we think of, you know, we have all grown up with London Zoo. As little children, we were taken to the zoo. As parents, we took our children to the zoo. As grandparents, we've taken our children to the zoo. And not only London Zoo, as you say, Whipsnade Zoo and possibly other zoos around the country. So I can't imagine London ever without its famous zoo. But there you are. I'm pleased you put the lid on that very, very firmly. And I'm sure many, many other people will be grateful for that as well. I'm not sure how it ever could have got off the ground, but there you are. You never know these days, do you? So lovely. Thank you for a lovely story. And Anthony, you did all right. Thank you. It's the slides were fine. They worked well with Ruth and her stories.
Properly.
Right. Anybody got some questions for Ruth that they'd like to ask of her? Right. Celia?
Hello, Ruth. How nice to see you again. We used to work together on Tuesdays at the zoo and spent many happy hours doing the trolleys together, the information kiosk.
And I remember you getting your degree. I'm very proud of you.
I did. Yes, I did that as well. And it's so nice to catch up with you. It was a lovely trip down memory lane. And I also did some tour training. I used to take groups of people around, telling them not just about the animals, but of course there's very interesting architecture at the zoo, and there are a number of listed buildings which people also found very interesting. But I just want to say thank you. If you're still at the same address as you were about 5 years ago, I will give you a ring and we'll catch up. Perhaps later today. Lovely to see you. I hope you're well.
Okay, and thank you for that. So it's amazing how our talks put people together over the few months. We've had people that hadn't met up with each other for 40, 50 years got together through Sage. Wonderful. So we've reconnected you again. Angela, you wanted to come in?
Yes. Hello. Yes, that was such an interesting talk. I so enjoyed it. Thank you very much. But I just wanted to ask you something funny. Did you go to Henrietta Barnett?
Yes, I did.
Did you go to Henrietta Barnett School?
Yes,
because Mrs. Cruikshank's a very unusual name. I went there. I didn't have her for many lessons. Miss Harris was my biology teacher, and I was going to do biology, but I kept fainting when they did all the nasty dissection, so I never did that. But Mrs. Cruikshank was a very charming lady, and I knew her daughter was at school, so I just thought I'd mention that. But again, thoroughly enjoyed your talk.
I was wondering who I'd catch up with on this talk. I must tell you, it's rather lovely.
I remember remember Henrietta Barnett's school well. It was at sort of my age group as well. I knew many girls that went there, but it was always the very clever girls only that went to Henrietta Barnett, I have to say. So, I'm not surprised to hear about your qualifications, Ruth.
Well, I have to say, this is nothing to do with the zoo, but I went back to Henrietta Barnett to teach. And eventually, because Mrs. Cruikshank asked me if I would come in on the team. And I remember having these girls, there were 30 girls in the class, 6 would be exceptionally bright, 6 would have difficulty coping. Now, how much does that make out of 30? Anyhow, and the rest were a varying standard of intelligence and intellect. Because I found that fascinating.
Okay, there were a few. The other one was Copthall around that time, Copthall School.
Yeah.
But I think Henrietta Barnett was always considered to be that slightly higher up in terms of elitist, if I can put it like that. But not for me to say.
Sorry, one question I'm waiting for, and nobody's asking me or telling me, is it's too expensive to go to the zoo. Do any of you feel like that?
Yes.
Right.
Our children do. They used to belong, and it's too expensive now.
Well, can I tell you something?
Can you just tell us what it cost, first of all, because I've lost touch with that.
Sorry?
Do you know what it costs these days? Because I've lost touch with how much it
I
costs.
know. When the zoo was opened, it cost 1 shilling, and most poor people couldn't afford that. Today, the equivalent is £90.
Ooh.
However, today, the zoo costs £24.30 for an adult and £18 for a child. But there are all sorts of different combinations that you can get it that makes it a much, much cheaper day out. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID, the only way you can get to the zoo today is online. So you have to book a day and a time, whatever. But Madame Tussauds costs £39 to get into for an adult, £34 for a child, and your tour lasts between an hour and an hour and a half.
Gosh.
But the theatre prices can go from what, £12 to Royal Opera House for one of the operas, 160 quid for a 2 to 3 hour performance. The London Aquarium prices are £23.59, which are virtually the same as the zoo. And you can go there for 1 and 1.5 hours. The zoo costs £24.30 for the whole day. And the only extras, if you choose, are to go to the restaurants or the ice cream parlours or whatever. So in fact, what you are getting for your money is a whole day's entertainment. There are all sorts of lectures and all sorts of talks and everything, all sorts of activities to participate in. I tell one lie. They've got a carousel you have to pay to go on.
Okay.
But those people whose children feel that day's outing is expensive should consider it with regard to the other places that charge.
Okay, you've sold that to us, Ruth. Very good. It's certainly is good value. Good value.
I can sell zoo tickets.
Good value by comparison. Is Whipsonade the same price?
Yes, of course.
Okay. And Whipsonade is a different experience, of course, because it's much more spread out and out,
yes.
You know, out in the country, so to speak. And the animals are much freer to roam there, aren't they?
Well, it's wonderful to go to Whipsonade, I know, because you can actually ride through the lion enclosure and see a whole pride of lions. Whereas in London Zoo, we only have a couple of lions because that's all we've got space for. I don't know if you've noticed, everybody, that there are no elephants anymore at London Zoo because it was considered they did not have enough room to go. They used to take them for walks around the zoo, admittedly, But at Whipsnade Zoo, they've got enormous area of land that they can move and travel around in.
Any more? Okay, any more questions for Ruth?
Well, this is Daphne. Ruth.
Hello,
Daphne?
Daphne.
Hello.
Can I see
Nice
you,
to meet
Daphne?
I'm there. I'm here. I don't know if you. Here we are. Here.
There's Daphne. Hello, Daphne. Nice to see you in the flesh.
That's right. And I just wanted to say thank you. And it was absolutely fascinating. And as I tell all our speakers, our strapline for Sage is it's never too late to learn. And we certainly learned a lot of things today. So thank you very, very much.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, Ruth, thank you.
Now, let me tell you something now that somebody once asked me, what did I do after I left the zoo? Well, I've actually been working for the Metropolitan Police for the last 16 years as a volunteer on the front counter well, I'm now in Edmonton Police Station, but I have moved around.
Oh, fascinating. You can tell us all about that one day.
If you like.
I hope you're volunteering for Muswell Hill Shore as well. They can always do with volunteers, these shores. You're obviously keen to get involved, but thank you so much, Ruth. As Daphne said, it's very, very different perspective, very interesting, and thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, just to sum up, to remind you, next Tuesday we have Leslie Daniels, our resident master chef. Get your ingredients ready so you can cook along with Leslie. And actually, we have a double dose of Leslie. Leslie is actually hosting the current affairs for the first time ever this coming Thursday. So do join us 2 o'clock on Thursday for current affairs, Leslie Daniels. And join us PG next Tuesday, Master Chef, also with Leslie Daniels. So have a good rest of the week. See you either Thursday or see you next Tuesday. Keep well, keep safe.